for being here. I'm Rawabi, and I'm going to speak to you today about coaching men from an Emirati woman's perspective. Um, so before we start, I would like to give you a bit of an introduction. I'm Rawabi Al-Nuiami. I am an Emirati woman. I was born in the early 80s, 1980 to be exact. Um, and this is a picture of my family at that time. I'm hiding my mother's face because she doesn't want to be in here. But you will notice that my father is wearing a tie, not an Emirati kandora, and that's because I was born in London. But I grew up in the UAE, so I was brought back when I was 15 days old. I did not live in the UK. But these two facts actually make me a little bit different. My name is unique. I have never met another Rawabi before. And growing up, I've never met anyone who was born in London before. So I enjoyed being different. I enjoyed feeling a bit unique. Um, I am Arab, I am Muslim, and these two parts of my identity are very visible, which means that it's not only the way that I see the world, but also the world sees me this way. So, what I will share here specifically applies to my generation. I have a sister who was born in 1985, and she does not her experience was different. She does not share the same experience as I had. um when I coach, so I'm an internal coach. I coach mostly pilots, and they come from all corners of the world. And because I coach pilots, 98% of my coachees are men. um, So a little bit about my background. I am the eldest daughter of five children. This is a more recent picture that we had few years ago ziplining. Um, and I learned from that experience to be the know-it-all. I would tell them what to do. I knew what's better for them, but I also felt a need to save, to rescue, to protect my siblings. And I wanted to share with you a story. Um, so this is a picture of me and my sister, and you will see here that she was, I was given a lollipop, and she saw the lollipop. They didn't give it to her because she would make a mess. They asked me to hide it from her, but she wouldn't stop crying. So then I decided to hold her hand and to give her my lollipop while she is, enjoying it, but also not creating a mess. And I think through that, I learned, and other stories as well, I learned the fact that I am naturally empathetic, but I also had that need to support and protect. And that's a big part of my identity. It's a big part of how I show up as a coach as well. Um, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about my education. But before that, I would like to share with you um, my father's education, my parents' education. So, my parents are first generation formally educated Emiratis. My father wanted to become a doctor. He couldn't because he didn't have the means for it. But then he persisted, and he had a PhD degree, completed his PhD degree in his early 30s. Um, my mother also is a bachelor degree graduate. She had three kids when she completed. My father was pushing her to continue her education, but she decided she's not going to do that. Um, this is a picture of my father. So this is my father. He organized and set up the very first book fair in the UAE. This is Sheikh Zayed, who is the founder of the UAE. And I grew up with books everywhere, my father's library. So of course, I loved reading, and I am. This is a big part of my identity as well. Uh, this is a picture of me in school. Now, my mother was very competitive, and she really pushed me to do well in school. I did not work very hard, but I used to get very high grades, 98%, 99%. But I was also punished because I did not work hard. So 98 and 99 were not good enough for my mother. And another thing that is shared among my generation, as a girl, you're expected to get good grades. As a boy, you weren't expected to get a good grade. So there was more pressure on girls performing well in school. When I graduated, I wanted to become a psychologist. I couldn't because I didn't have we didn't have the major close by in the universities near my home. So I ended up studying IT. I worked in an engineering department, which was primarily male dominant. So we were just few girls or few women. And it was, I have to say, it was a very scary experience for me. It took me a very long time to get used to it. But I learned high expectations of myself. I internalized that critical voice. So I am very critical, and that's something everyone notices about me. But I learned also how to find my way through restrictions, so leaving engineering behind. So how do I show up as a coach? I really like this picture because sometimes it feels like I'm paddling frantically, and sometimes it feels like I'm just floating and enjoying the conversation. So based on feedback, I was told that I'm authentic, friendly. I'm clearly curious, hospitable, and that's mostly before COVID, I would say. Um, I am naturally supportive, and that shows up all the time in my sessions. I'm also empathetic. But what they don't notice is that I'm very critical about my coaching. And there is a strong need to please, to rescue, to save, that I need to be very mindful of all the time. Because it shows up, it keeps showing up in the most creative of ways. And I remember a couple of years ago, I had a supervision session. And after a monologue of me criticizing myself, my supervisor, who I think she's here at the moment, she's listening to this, said to me, "You don't see that you pull people in. People become comfortable with you. You're very personal. You're the most open, reflective person I met, full stop." And while I really appreciate this, it also made me realize that number one, I didn't even notice this. And I think that I didn't notice it because I didn't have to work hard for it. So just like I wasn't appreciated because I didn't work hard, I also wasn't appreciating myself because I didn't work hard. And that came naturally to me. And the way that I see it is it came naturally to me because of what shaped who I am. So my family shaped who I am, of course, and then my extended family. So this is my grandmother. This is my great grandmother. Now, my grandmother in this picture is probably my age at the moment. And this is my uncle who passed away in the 90s, and this was his wife. And I'm covering her face again because I'm not in touch with her, so I couldn't ask her permission. Um, but my extended family, this is part of my extended family, but they were a big part of my day-to-day life. And they really shaped who I am. My religion is also a big part of who I am. It's not only my belief, it's also my way of life. It's the lens I see the world through, and my culture. And when I talk about culture here, and um, I think it's an important point. When I talk about my culture, I'm not talking about it from an objective perspective, but I'm talking about how I experienced it. And because of this, other people experience it very differently or might have very different views. But this is how I made sense of it. So the way that I saw my culture, it is not really my religion. There is a big overlap, but a big part also of my culture comes from the Arab traditions, not necessarily the Islamic traditions. Um, and then there is modern UAE and how the UAE, the UAE changed, and particularly when it comes to women and the role of women, and what I witnessed in my life. So I remember my father saying this when I was younger. I would hear him say something like, "Ask a woman for her opinion, then do the opposite." He doesn't dare say this now, but this is something that he used to say all the time. And he really believed that as a woman, I am more inclined to think emotionally and not rationally. But then religion tells me that women have rights similar to their obligations according to what is fair. And that is basically that this verse and other verses tell me that men and women are different, but they're equal. Um, and then modern UAE was telling me that there's no glass ceiling, that I can aim high and my country will support me. And this is what I saw happening in my life and a little bit before my life, when Sheikh Zayed pushed for women's education, women's empowerment. And even now, our leadership really invest in that. So this is a picture of the crown prince in Dubai with a picture of with his cousin, who is one of the first Emirati women who became pilots, and he made or set the example of this is something to celebrate, and it's not shameful as it used to be. But then again, everything it wasn't always great. I did face some challenges. So yes, I was valued for my achievement and intellect, but also punished for being less than perfect. I was served and protected by my parents, still am, um, but I was also overprotected, and therefore limited sometimes. And the rationale is so people won't talk, and people talking is a big deal for men and women in the UAE. I also enjoyed being different, but also I was judged by my family for being different and vocal about it. Um, there were education barriers that I had to overcome, which also means that I feel like some of my life was wasted a little bit. But you know what? It's always an experience. Um, when I started coaching, I think my cultural values really shaped how I am because I didn't have the education that I have now after AMEC. Um, but I had hospitality. And hospitality, in its essence, is that I need to make sure that you, as my guest, are feeling comfortable, you feel valued, um, and that is a big part of how I showed up as a coach. I even had treats and coffee and Arabic coffee sometimes. Um, listen to understand. I saw Sheikh Zayed when I was growing up, spending a lot of time with people in the UAE, different people, different tribes, trying to understand what they want, what they need, what's important to them. And he used that in service, and particularly in how he empowered women, so that he would get the support of the tribe leaders. And listening and understanding and being in service is really the heart of coaching from my point of view. Um, and I also wanted to share my view and the Emirati woman's view on feminism. Now, this is a picture of Her Highness Sheikha Badur. She is the daughter of Sheikh Sultan, the ruler of Sharjah, which is one of the seven emirates. She's at the moment in the same building I'm in right now. She's just, they took this picture just above me. And she posted this post, which went viral a few years ago, which really embodies exactly how I think, what I think the woman's role is. So she said, our generation is busy trying to prove that women can do everything that men can do. This is how women lose the unique and valuable qualities that they have, like being feminine. Women are not made to do everything a man can do. Women are made to do everything a man cannot. And then she said, the world needs kinder, gentler, merciful, dedicated, and persistent women. be confident, bold, pure, and kind-hearted. And this is exactly how I want to show up as a woman, as an Emirati. I don't want to discard my femininity because I need to be equal in the Western sense. I want to be equal in my sense. And I find this a different perspective to what people might believe. But that is the woman who I am. And I am coaching men. So in the sessions, I usually notice some power dynamics. There is the man versus woman. There is the dynamics of Emirati versus expat. So, as an Emirati, not all expats have the experience of dealing with Emiratis in general or Emirati women. We're a minority, so not everyone will be experiencing that. But also, there's I would say that there's the sense of privilege. So they believe that we are privileged sometimes, or they believe that we are easily offended. So there's always that, um, I would say, um, respect, but also being careful. They're usually a little bit careful. And on top of this, not only an Emirati, but also an Emirati woman. So my friend, my American friend, calls us the untouchables, and she said that Emirati women usually, or the assumption is that we are unapproachable. Don't go and talk to her. She will be offended. And I really need to break that barrier in the session. And this is why I resorted to hospitality, um, because this is my natural way to break the ice. Also, part of my role is assessment. And sometimes I am seen as the assessor, not only the coach. And sometimes people want to impress me. So I need to be also very mindful of that, not only during the contracting, but also how it shows up in the session. And there's the pilot versus non-pilot. And I remember when I started coaching pilots, I took over from a colleague who is white male with around 30 years of experience, and he told me that pilots let do not listen to non-pilots. You need to really prove yourself. And through the conversation, I realized that he also meant that I am also a woman, which will make it harder, and I'm Emirati, that will make it harder. He didn't say it out loud, but that's the impression I got. So I made sure that I find a way to connect with them. And because I love muscle cars, I would talk about cars with them, and that really broke the ice. But then I realized I didn't need it. It wasn't necessary. It was just my assumption. So, how they respond, for the most part, they're initially careful. They even stop and pause and see if I will shake their hands or their hands or not. They're very respectful. Um, Again, for the most part, very, very few who will try to put me in my place. Um, but for the most part, they're very, very respectful and they're very curious. Now, when it comes to pilots, they also fly with Emirati pilots, so they still have an exposure. They're exposed to the they're exposed to the culture, but they're not really exposed to the women's side of the culture because they wouldn't mix with them. Um, and that takes us to diversity because it's a very diverse group of people. And so this is a picture. And in this picture, there are, I think, 3 or 4 nationalities just in this picture. Now, growing up, the people around me were mainly either from the subcontinent or Arabs, as in expat Arabs. I didn't really meet many um, people from Europe, for example. But I used to travel a lot. We used to travel to different places, like basically, for the most part, the UK, Germany, Egypt, Turkey, but also we went to different places in Europe and other parts of the world. And my parents had friends who are not Emirati. So they were always there, from the Egyptian teacher to the British professor. And I remember that growing up. But when I look at diversity, I have my own views, my own North Star. And it comes from my religion. And that was shaped very, very early on. So, one of the very first verses I learned is to you, your religion, and to me, my religion. Now, religion here doesn't really just um, talk about religion, it's also way of life, it's belief. And through this, I learned tolerance. So, we don't really have to believe in the same thing in order for us to be friends or for me to love you as a person. I also learned equality, and I remember I was in the first grade when I was having this conversation. This is a saying by the Prophet. There's no favor of an Arab over a foreigner, nor a foreigner over an Arab, neither white skin over black skin, nor black skin over white skin, except by righteousness. And righteousness isn't really measured, therefore, you cannot really measure who's more in favor. And then I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is, I'm assuming, also here. And we talked about, I said to her, I don't really see how I do things differently. And we were talking about race and diversity. And then I realized that I'm actually very curious. So I'm looking at it, I'm looking at differences as a way to celebrate and to inquire about and to ask more, compared to other areas in the world where they see differences as, oh, this is wrong. You have to believe in what I believe in. So curiosity actually came from this verse, which I used to quote all the time growing up. We created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. And through that, I realized the joy of getting to know people from other cultures. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about my favorite subject, and I'm being very, very sarcastic here. Um, but my tutor suggested that I look into that as I was writing my dissertation. And imagine my shock when he said that. Because how can this be present in the session? This is taboo. This is haram. This is not happening. I saw this quote, or Sears thought that the establishment of a mutually loving relationship was the heart of treatment. And I thought, yeah, that's, makes sense. There has to be some love, not romantic love, definitely not, there's nothing erotic in it. But also, there are some personal factors that contributed to my perspective, my personal history. There are the cultural influences, the way that I see romance, and intimacy, but also from my coaching training, because we talked about ethics in coaching. And my understanding is it shouldn't be present. And therefore, just him suggesting that I look into it, was it made me feel that I was not being ethical. And then I read this. The very situation of therapy might facilitate the emergence of erotic feelings on the part of the patient, and as it turned out, on the part of the therapist as well. And the interesting thing here is it was written in a very objective way, as a fact of life. It happens. And to me, that was a big shift in the way that I see it, that I saw it. So what I learned, and this is part of my dissertation. So Gabbard believed that many therapists are uncomfortable with loving feelings and find it safer to focus on sexual and erotic feelings. What I wrote is, I think it's the opposite experience for me, given my culture and upbringing. Now, I still don't understand how people will be uncomfortable with loving feelings, but more comfortable with sexual and erotic feelings, because the way that I see it is, you cannot control love, but you can control sexual and erotic feelings. But that's only my view. But there's also no shame. I think if I think about it, I always felt there's no shame in loving someone, but there is shame in acting on, or maybe judgment in acting on sexual and erotic feelings. So this is how I made sense of it. But I also asked myself this question: how accurate is my observation? Can I notice it? Can I see the signs? Because I don't think I do. And I realized that I don't necessarily know the signs because I don't have the same developmental journey as a typical woman in the West. Um, so it is a different perspective. I don't think I'm mature in that department. And when my friend read my dissertation, um, she said to me, there's a sense of innocence in the way that I was making sense of this topic. Um, so I have to say, it's nuanced understanding. I have no answer. I just have more questions, and I don't know what the answer is. Um, I have to spend a couple of slides talking about Emirati men. Um, what I noticed, because they can be a little bit different sometimes. What I noticed with Emirati men, they're extremely respectful and courteous to me as a woman. This is the general, I would say, general experience of the Emirati men I encounter. Um, but they also always view me as an expert. They keep calling me doctor. And even though I tell them I'm not a doctor, they continue calling me a doctor. And I really think that, or I'm wondering if they want me to be an expert to justify the fact that they're sitting with me and they're having an open conversation, vulnerable conversation. Uh, Usually they have few words. They're a bit cautious in the beginning. They always say it's all good. الأمور طيبة. They will always say that. And I had to really work hard on pulling um, some of, pulling out information sometimes and making them reflect out loud. And then I realized that opening up and expressing themselves is a new experience for many of them. And when they realize that there is no judgment, they actually enjoy it. And in that, I realized how much pressure men have in the UAE. The interesting thing is men have more pressure to fit in society than I have as a woman. So they don't speak up, and sometimes they don't express themselves because it is not that it is not expected of them. But of course, I had challenges. So, one of my challenges is that I grew up with the overwhelming message of beware men. Um, and if you are a Khaliji woman, a woman from the GCC, at roughly my age, you will recognize these pictures. Um, I was told that they would harm me, basically. Um, I also so one other challenge that I faced is when I speak in the Emirati dialect. So I coach in English, but of course we'll speak a little bit in the Emirati dialect. I go back to the big sister role, so I end up being a little bit directive and a know-it-all, which actually enforces the expert perception. So I end up directing them more, telling them what to do a little bit more, and I have to be very, very careful when it comes to that. And one of the main realizations during working on my dissertation is Emirati men, when they sit in the room, they embody my experience of my culture. They are the physical form of how I perceive my culture. And for a while, I realized that I was afraid of their judgment. I thought that they would judge me. And I discovered then that it's actually me who's judging them. I was judging them, so I was projecting that. I was judging them by saying things like, "Oh, they don't reflect as much," "Oh, they think this way." So I had that, even if I didn't say it out loud, I would have that thought, that idea. And when I changed my style, because I was a bit directive, I changed my style. I discovered how reflective they are and how open and open to feedback they are. And I realized that I was actually the one who that needed more awareness at that point. So my learnings, I discovered the beauty and grace of my culture. I discovered how this actually makes me, I think, a better coach. And that's because I connect genuinely with others through inherited wisdom. So thank you, my ancestors. Um, I learned to celebrate differences and then bond through similarities. Uh, I I can't count the number of times I was talking to Spanish speakers who would tell me, Spanish is has have words that are similar to Arabic. Um, Imagine my joy when I discovered that the Maltese language is probably 50% Arabic. So to me, that was something that I enjoyed, understanding, learning about others, but also finding those similarities. This is a saying that this is not from my culture. This is I watched a video. I think it was a video by Nubuntu, who is an Ubuntu coach, and she said, "I love all my clients. I may not like all my clients, but I love all my clients," and I really felt that. And I feel that I also come from a similar culture where you need to genuinely care about people. Even if you don't really like them, you still need to be hospitable and courteous and genuinely there for them. I believe that everyone responds well to authenticity. So I didn't need to talk about my car in order to connect with the pilots. I just needed to be me. I don't need to be more masculine. I do not need to assimilate to the Western standards. I can be myself. I can be what I believe in, and that is something that they will respond well because it's authentic. and and this is a big one. Not having the answer is okay. I don't need to know, as much as this frustrates me a little bit, I don't need to know the answer when it comes to erotic transference and counter transference. um, and instead of obsessing about the answer, I can just enjoy the journey and enjoy the exploring. Um, and this is something that I think you can tell that this is something that I'm making peace with at the moment. And I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much for your time. And if you'd like to continue this conversation, you can always contact me on LinkedIn.